Diplomatic relations exist between Australia and France, as well as the historical contacts, shared values of democracy and human rights, substantial commercial links, and a keen interest in each other's culture. The two countries maintain diplomatic relations in each other's countries. The French embassy in Australia is in Canberra, and the ambassador is Jean-Pierre Thebault. The Australian embassy in France is at 4 Rue Jean Rey, in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. Since November 2020, the ambassador has been Gillian Bird, who also has non-resident accreditation for Morocco, Monaco, Algeria and Mauritania. The legacy of Australian involvement on French soil in the First and Second World Wars plays an important role in the bilateral relationship. Over 45,000 Australians lost their lives on French soil in the two conflicts. Each year many Australians travel to the Western Front to commemorate the thousands of Australians who were killed and injured there in World War I. Dialogue and practical cooperation between France and Australia has been strengthening on many fronts in recent years, including on key global security issues such as arms control and disarmament, non-proliferation and counter-terrorism. The Pacific region, where both countries have direct interests, continues to be an important focus of bilateral engagement. Commercial links are substantial and France is an increasingly important source of direct investment and technology, including in the defense sector. For Australia, cooperation in the surveillance of valuable fisheries resources is also an area of ongoing bilateral activity. There has been an expansion of the defense relationship between Australia and France in recent years. On 14 December 2006, a new defense cooperation agreement between the two countries was signed, providing a framework for further cooperation. Australia and France regularly participate in combined force training exercises, and France provided support to the Australian-led INTERFET operations in East Timor. Australian and French forces have cooperated in the Pacific and Southern Oceans, including for emergency and disaster relief and operations against illegal fishing. Australia and France have also cooperated at various levels in the coalition against terrorism, including as founding members of the Proliferation Security Initiative to combat the trafficking in weapons of mass destruction. In 2008, it was announced that France and Australia would strengthen their defense cooperation further in the Pacific region. Australia and France have a dynamic relationship in all fields of the arts, with Australian artists enthusiastic to work within the French cultural tradition, and many French counterparts keen to explore Australia's vibrant younger culture. Institutional links are encouraged within the framework of the 1977 Australia-France Agreement on Cultural and Scientific Cooperation. The Australian Embassy in Paris administers the Australia-France Foundation, which promotes cultural exchanges between the two countries and publishes a quarterly newsletter, L'Australie en France, promoting Australian activities in France. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's Cultural Awards scheme has also promoted cultural relations between Australia and France. Australia has made a significant contribution to the Musée du Quai Branly, a major international museum dedicated to the world's indigenous arts and cultures that opened in Paris in June 2006. A permanent installation of works by 8 Australian indigenous artists commissioned by the Australian government has been incorporated into the structure of one of the main buildings of the museum. Tourist links between the two countries are significant, with over 400,000 Australians visiting France each year. Almost 98,000 visitor visas were granted to French nationals to visit Australia in 2005-06, making France the 10th largest source of visitor visa grants, and 1,867 student visas were granted. A working holiday maker agreement signed between the two countries in November 2003 makes it easier for young French and Australian people to spend time in each other's countries. In 2005-06, 6,126 Australian working holiday visas were granted to French nationals, making France the 7th largest source of working holiday visitors, and 483 were granted to Australians. Australia and France have maritime borders between their territories. The locations of these boundaries were formalized through the Australia-France Marine Delimitation Agreement, which came into effect on 10 January 1983. In August 2009, Nicolas Sarkozy became the first serving French leader to visit Australia. The Courier Mail reported that serious bilateral issues for Sarkozy and Kevin Rudd to discuss included the war in Afghanistan and global warming. François Hollande visited Canberra in November 2014 after the G20 summit in Brisbane. Meeting with Tony Abbott, Hollande reinforced the strong bonds forged between the two.